Let me talk for a second about Produce on Wheels. It's a great program. And one of the things that we chose to start doing last year was in our bags that we give out in the office is putting coupons in. Those $10 coupons, so people could come up and get that produce, but wouldn't have to pay the $10. Guess how that gets funded? If you have an extra $10, donate that to the office so that can continue to go out. We put those in the bags that go home with our children too, so they can come. So if you'd like to be able to help with that, we'd love to be able to have you help. This story about Bartimaeus is an important story. It's a great story, and it's a challenging story because we all have a Bartimaeus in our life. Someone who sits off to the edges of our community. Someone who sits outside of who we want to easily see or be in connection with. And it's so easy for us to leave that person over there. And yet that person has a very difficult job. It's the job of taking a step towards. And how many know that step towards isn't easy at all? I told you a couple weeks ago that Joni and I like Amazing Race, and one of the types of challenges they have on a regular basis in Amazing Race is the step off the cliff challenge of one sort or another. Maybe they have a bungee cord strapped to their back, or maybe it's just a jump that's a little farther than typical, but they have to figure out how to take that step off of that cliff and how to figure out how to take that first step towards is not ever simple. Deepak Chopra said this: the journey of 1,000 miles doesn't begin with the first step. It begins with the assurance that you can take the first step. And being able to build up that idea inside your head and that courage to be able to take that first step is hard. And our job as people of belief is to help instill that back into people. And some of the things we do as church people sometimes get in the way of that. I don't know if you've noticed that. There's sometimes words that we use that get in the way of that process. One of the words that I know many of you have struggled with, as I have, is the word salvation. And why? Because of how they use it. Somebody else uses it that tends to say, I'm saved, but you're not. There's another word that I have that's like that as well. And it's a word, here's the tough part for you guys. It's a word that many of you like. And it's the word enlightenment. Because in the same way that some people say, I'm saved and you're not, we say, I'm enlightened and you're not. And it's a way to be able to exclude or to say I'm better than. And then I saw this book by Andrew Cohen. It's called Evolutionary Enlightenment. And I wanted to reject it. I wanted to say, I don't want to read that book. But the subtitle drew me in. And it says, A New Path to Spiritual Awakening. Awakening I like. I like that image, that idea, because there's nothing wrong with being asleep, right? And we need to be awakened. We need to help each other to awaken. And so he began to give me a different idea of what he meant by enlightenment. And he drew me in little by little into his book. And it was this sense of becoming, of doing something different than what we've already been. And he said this: the fact that highly evolved beings can now awaken directly to the evolutionary impulse means that God, as the creative principle, is able to see, hear, taste, touch, and feel like never before his or her creation through us. And even more importantly, that cosmic intelligence and creative energy can begin to consciously act through the awakened human being. If we choose to awaken, if we choose to let enlightenment happen to us, it's so that we can see something more than what we saw at first glance. We choose to see that. And that choice is not necessarily easy. But he asserts that the greatest gift that evolution has given us is that power to choose. That in that moment that we are there, faced with some dilemma, some challenge, some Bartimaeus, some person over there that sits outside of our community, outside of who we easily let in, we get to choose what to do. And each of us has blocks that make it so that we don't want to see that other person or see the truth about them. Right? What are some of the blocks you have? There's lots of things inside there. Some reason why that person is not easy, that person is not fun, that person is not desirable in your community. And yet you have the choice in every single moment to overlook your blocks. Overlook your really easy looking. Because I can look and see all that stuff which blinds me, or I can see that which draws me towards. And guess which God is asking us to see? And how God is asking us to act in that moment. All those blocks lock us inside a prison and make it so that we can't sometimes see beyond that prison that we are in. And we don't even know that it exists very often. And yet, as Cohen says, each and every time you realize that you're not a prisoner, it gives you a deeper confidence in that empty ground that is your own deepest self. Every single time you choose not to be imprisoned by some way of viewing that other person and relating to that other person, you allow yourself to rest in that deeper ground, that great ground of being that is there. But you have to choose that again and again. And that means you get to see yourself differently and you get to see them differently. Bartimaeus can just be that person that you help, or it can be a soul that you touch and that you relate to. Bartimaeus can be just a person that you overlook, or a soul that you truly see. Bartimaeus can be somebody that you ignore or walk past or yell at because they're in the way. And how many know that sometimes those people get in the way? Right? But you get to choose if you see them that way or if you see them differently. Cohen tells us in one of his chapters to face everything and avoid nothing. That's our choice. If in that moment we truly face it and choose not to avoid it. And an enlightened consciousness is achieved through active and deliberate choice. A choice that is made again and again and again. It's us listening to that voice of God and stepping towards that other person, despite all the reasons why our heart says, don't go that way. But God says, draw him forward. Draw her forward. Draw them towards me. Be in that space so that I can be seen through who you are. Spiritual development is about compelling ourselves through the power of our own inspired will and intention to actually evolve. And so those disciples who just wanted to clear the path, who wanted Jesus to be able to get where he was going, those disciples had to choose to stop and then walk towards Bartimaeus and see him differently than before. And one of the big words that Cohen uses is the word available. To be available to each other, to be available to that moment in life, to be available within ourselves and to whatever is coming from without. And he says available means we are no longer distracted by the karmic momentum of the past, by the fears and desires of the personal ego or the culturally conditioned self. Can we be available to what God is trying to do in us and around us? Can we awaken to what God is truly doing right here, right now, in this moment? Can we hear and follow the voice that is drawing us forward, asking us to go forward? Or can we set aside our superiority? Oh, I'm going to help, I'm going to fix. Can we set that aside and just be in that moment and relate? And maybe even more important, can we see how that person maybe can teach us? For you see, one of the great principles that Cohen talks about here is that the path and the goal are one. And when we sit in a space of superiority, in that moment we think we already have the goal in so many ways, compared to them at least. But if they're on the path, if they're beginning to look to God, they are in the same space as us. And can we see that? Or do we reach out to those people in need in just a way that we feel superior, that we're fixing, we're helping? Or do we see a human being, a spiritual being, walking towards that same oneness that we say we are walking towards? See, Bartimaeus is already on that spiritual road, and sometimes we think he's not because, for whatever reason, he looks different, acts different, isn't where we are. He's not following the master we've decided to follow. But that God sees him, right? And sees the truth about him, and calls us to see that as well. In all of those Bartimaeuses of our lives, all those people who look like they're not part of us, part of community. And our job is to be there with them so that they can recognize, so they can awaken as well. And they can hear the voice that has always been there and see the God that's always been around them and can once again show us how they have experienced that God. You recognize that the pursuit of enlightenment can never have been merely for yourself alone. Remember, 14 billion years ago, something burst out of nothing, and the leading edge of that miraculous surge of becoming is found in your own interior, experienced as the emerging capacity for higher consciousness. You see, we're on this wave of consciousness that is flowing outward. And here's the problem with waves. You never get to be just on the leading edge all the time. Isn't that how waves would happen? Right? It's always moving forward. And your job is to be on the edge when you're there, but then to tumble back into the middle. And sometimes be there where you're reaching out to Bartimaeus, and other times be the one where Bartimaeus is reaching out to you. But to recognize that it is not about individuals, it is about us as a whole. It's about this oneness that God is trying to draw out of these individual particles and trying to move us towards something more. When two or more people awaken to the evolutionary impulse and glimpse the singular nature of the infinite vastness that is the cosmocentric perspective, there is absolutely no sense of otherness. Amen. Can we see that? Can we allow that to happen? Can we look into the eyes of those people around us, especially the ones who, for whatever reason, tend to make our eyes look away, tend to make our hearts quake? Can we look towards them and see no otherness? Mike, one of my good celebration mentors, on Tuesday asked me this question. He said, Jim, you know movies. What movie expresses this idea? And immediately 2 movies popped into my head. Oh, I can't say that one. That was not a good one to say. So I said the easy one. I talked about Mrs. Frisbee. If you know Mrs. Frisbee, is from The Secret of NIMH. Mrs. Frisbee is a little mouse, and she has to recruit the rats to help her. She doesn't want to. Those rats that's the wrong sort of people. But she discovers a oneness with them, and they achieve their goals. But then I went back to the other one, the one I didn't want to see. And it's that movie, not quite as light affair as The Secret of NIMH. It's called The Silence of the Lambs. And there's Hannibal Lecter and Clarice, who has to relate to him. And he's a good person to hate. He's a good other. He's a good, I don't want to be there in relationship with him. And yet in the movie, the most amazing thing is that Clarice figures out that in spite of everything that she wants to do to reject him, there's also this importance of that connection. And it's not just how he can help her, it's the relationship itself that is compelling. And she discovers a oneness with him in spite of all her misgivings. And I realized that in this juxtaposition of this light children's fare and this very deep and dark movie, I realized that that's what every movie speaks, isn't it? And maybe every story is somehow us figuring out how to step beyond what pulls us apart, what sets us in separate camps, which makes it so that I can find barriers between us and tells us how to find a connection. And not just find it, but celebrate it. I heard a great word this week. I think you'll like it. It's pronoia. Have you heard of that before? It's the opposite of paranoia. You know what paranoia is? Paranoia is that thing which makes you fear this. What if instead we look at all those thises, all those people, all those things that want to put fear into us, and we look at them and say, look, everything in this universe is conspiring to help me. Everything in this universe is conspiring to help me move forward, become more, and everything in this universe is helping to become more for Bartimaeus as well. What if we begin to look at all of us as part of this great wave that's moving forward? What if we begin to honor and celebrate what God is doing in the great oneness of who we are? How would that change the world? Amen?